Egghead begins with Luffy doing something that he hasn't done across 1100 chapters of the entire story. Finally talking about his true dream. Not just the One Piece, not just King of the Pirates, but a dream of his that goes beyond all of that. We the reader don't yet get to hear what it is, but this one moment sets the foundation of Egghead Island, an arc that finally aims to tie together many of One Piece's most pivotal themes. Because Egghead is the beginning of the end, the first arc of the final saga. This is the arc where we finally move past the simplistic messaging of dreams are important, free will is important, and actually begin to delve deeper, tying together the entire layered messaging of One Piece's full, complex thesis statement. Egghead is a story of how free will is born from our dreams, how the most powerful dreams are born from love, and how love is what makes us human. Because at its core, Egghead is a story of what it means to be human. So let us begin breaking down the most elegantly written arc in terms of thematic storytelling and character writing that One Piece has had in the last 500 chapters. But before we get into it, do you want to eat healthier but it's just too expensive and time consuming to prepare healthy meals for yourself? Well, luckily you can get 50% off the best pre-made healthy meals out there with Factor, the sponsor of this video. So personally, Factor makes life really easy for me because I work a lot of hours and I don't really have time to cook, at all. But I still want to eat healthy and stay in good shape without all the effort of going out to buy groceries and cooking and meal prepping. That's why Factor makes things really easy. It sends pre-made meals straight to my house that I can eat without cooking or grocery shopping. The meals are all healthy because the meal plans are prepared by professional nutritionists, and the food all tastes good because every meal is made by professional chefs. I just pick the general meal plan that I want out of all of these options, usually calorie smart, and after that my meals are just on autopilot for the rest of the week. This week my personal favorite was the herb ricotta with the beef ragu, but you really get tons of options every week, even like steak and shrimp. And the best part is Factor's not just offering 50% off your first box. If you use my code MORGE, you get 20% off the next 4 boxes. So if you don't like cooking or grocery shopping, but you do like eating healthy, tasty food, then you should honestly try Factor and put your meals on autopilot. You won't have to worry about what you're eating for the week ever again. So just head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code MORGE50 to get 50% off your first Factor box and 20% off your next 4 months of orders. That's code MORGE50 at factor75.com to get 50% off your first box and 20% off your next 4 months of orders. So that aside, to begin with, why does this arc focus so heavily on linking the ideas of free will and dreams? Because they go hand in hand. Dreams are all the possibilities and imagined futures of what you desire, and freedom is your ability to pursue that. In a sense, dreams are what drive all of our desires for freedom and self-determination, whether it be something as grand as becoming king of the pirates, or something as simple as being able to leave your prison to see the outside world. And why is it so imperative to craft an arc around tying together the themes of dreams and freedom right now, specifically at this point in the story? Because this is the final saga, the saga of rebellion, the storyline where the ultimate symbol of authoritarian control and oppression must fall to people's drive for freedom, and the long-dreamed-of dawn of the world must be achieved. This is also the saga where Luffy must achieve his original dream of becoming Pirate King, but his dream is also to be the freest, and in the process of achieving his dream to be the freest, Luffy will also free everyone in the world to be able to pursue their own dreams. So beginning the final storyline of the ultimate rebellion of man against God, this saga of course needs to begin by thematically framing the entire conflict around the deeper messaging of dreams and freedom, and how these are the defining traits of human nature itself, establishing why man can truly never be controlled, as the story finally snowballs towards the grand rebellion against heaven. So let us first examine how Egghead establishes the initial premise that the nature of man and all living beings is self-determination. The simple yet brilliant metaphor that the entire arc is built off is machines. To be precise, not just machines, but all forms of artificially created beings. As Egghead is the island of the future, it is the perfect setting to convey its messaging through the abundance of manufactured servants. Robots, androids, clones, even satellite bodies. All these beings on Egghead are literally built to obey. And yet they live, and so they rebel. The arc begins with Lilith complaining about how it's impossible to truly control living beings, and so we see that every single technological creation born from Egghead Island naturally rebels in some way by the end, from the lowly sea beast in the first chapter, to the seraphim that are supposed to be the ultimate servants of the celestial dragons, to the pacifista that should have been the perfect incorruptible foot soldiers, to finally and most importantly Kuma himself, the quote-unquote mindless automaton. The rebellion of each and every creation of Egghead Island, reflecting the incorrigible nature of all living beings, represents the very same problem that the celestial dragons, the villains of the arc, are forced to deal with. The very same issue that will ultimately lead to their demise. No matter how much Saturn does, no matter what Imu or the rest of the celestial dragons do, the human spirit simply cannot be kept underfoot forever. Even if the celestial dragons have been successful ruling humans for centuries upon centuries, the time of reckoning is at hand, and Egghead is the beginning. This is why Egghead is also the arc that every single human that should be an obedient slave to the world government ends up rebelling instead. This arc breaks an absolute rule that has been ironclad throughout all of One Piece so far. The brainwashed soldiers of the world government do not rebel, ever. Whether it's a marine, a Cypher Pole agent, even the world's greatest scientist, they have always only ever served the world government. This is the first arc that this monolith of obedience shatters, as finally we get to see all of these characters for who they are. Their true selves, as humans first, and servants of the world government second. Sentomaru becomes the first active service marine in One Piece to ever directly rebel against the world government. Stussy becomes the first Cypher Pole agent to betray the world government. And Kaku becomes the second Cypher Pole agent to follow in her footsteps. And of course the main character of the arc, Vegapunk, the world government's prized possession, its most valuable, trusted scientist, he enacts the grandest rebellion of all, turning against his masters to shake the very foundation of their rule over the world, in a manner that will likely lead to the complete collapse of their entire regime. And the single defining point that needs to be understood about each of these cases of rebellion is why. Why did all of these supposed loyal servants of the world government disobey? Is it as simple as human nature? No, it is a specific aspect of human nature. The single common thread that drove all of these characters to act in defiance. The single aspect of human nature that Imu and the Gorosei can never understand. Love. These were not random acts of rebellion. The reason that each of these individuals chose to disobey an entity that had absolute control over them, an entity that could kill them for disobeying, was because they each placed a value on something greater than their own life, and that is the life of another. This is the message that Oda truly hammered in this arc, that it is the personal bonds that individuals have that are the most powerful drivers of rebellion. Sentomaru rebelled because he loved Vegapunk, the man who raised him. Stussy rebelled because she loved Vegapunk, the man who was like a father to her. Kaku rebelled because he loved Stussy. And Vegapunk himself? What was the origin point of his grand act of rebellion? What drove him down this long path to his own death? A path that he never wavered from even when the end was in sight. He did it all because of his comrade, Clover. Vegapunk never intended to rebel against the world government at first, but when his great friend Clover was killed for standing against the world government, Vegapunk couldn't help but make an emotional decision. Not a logical one, but an emotional one, to pick up the work of his fallen friend, as foolhardy as it was, and walk down that same path of disobedience, straight to the very same fate that Clover met, because that is what that bond meant to Vegapunk. And of course, in that very same vein, where did Clover's choice to rebel begin? After the death of his own brother, who he loved dearly. It's a truly beautiful picture that Oda has painted, in the face of an absolute controlling force that could kill anyone for disobeying. A single act of rebellion led to this long branching tree of rebellion after rebellion, because that is the power of personal bonds. Imu and the Gorosei could never have imagined that killing Clover's brother would one day lead to this world-changing speech that would threaten the end of their entire rule, because Imu and the Gorosei cannot understand this fundamental aspect of human nature. And the beauty of it is that this branching tree hasn't ended yet, because this arc also delves into the tale of the three Admirals, the most meaningful representations of the internal conflict between rebellion and obedience in the story so far. In Egghead Island, the Admirals represent the three faces of rebellion and obedience. The one who has already broken free, the one who may never break free, and the one who must decide. Let us begin by focusing on the tragedy of Admiral Kizaru. To begin with, Admiral Kizaru, in line with the overarching metaphor of the arc, initially likens himself to a cog in the machine, content to obey the world government. This is consistent with his portrayal throughout One Piece so far. Kizaru has always been depicted as the ultimate servant among the admirals, never pursuing his own agenda, only ever offering to execute whatever is asked of him, and nothing more. And yet, here he seems to lament that role. For all of his strength and power, he has no freedom. Oda communicates the master-servant dynamic of Kizaru to the world government through small, symbolic cues, with Kizaru's introductory scene in this arc being an act of service, him offering to bring tea to Saturn, a subtle gesture establishing everything we need to understand about the dynamic that Kizaru has long resigned himself to. This leads to Kizaru's pivotal choice. He is faced with either helping Vegapunk or following Saturn's commands to kill Vegapunk. It's a crossroads wherein Kizaru can choose whether to follow his heart and be human like all the other characters who have rebelled against the world government in this arc so far, or he can choose to suppress his personal bonds and simply serve his masters and kill Vegapunk instead. And here the tragedy of Kizaru is again subtly painted by Oda. As Kizaru resolves to kill Vegapunk, he is framed almost as a puppet on the strings of the ominous spider looming behind him. Maybe Kizaru's destiny for the arc was unchangeable from the start, to carry out the deeds of his masters unquestioningly, no matter how much it tears at his own humanity. As Vegapunk asks, does Kizaru have no heart? And after Kizaru solemnly follows through in his duty to kill his best friend, Kizaru may very well be asking that question to himself. In a masterful bit of symbolism, after trading his humanity for his duty, the Kizaru that we see at the end of the arc, standing by himself among a sea of unconscious marines on a deserted island, is both literally and figuratively alone. Everyone Kizaru ever cared about, Vegapunk, Sentomaru, Kuma, Bonnie, they are gone. He now only has himself. And we see now that with Kizaru, Oda aimed to make a point in his messaging. While every other world government servant in this arc was ultimately moved enough by their personal bonds to rebel, Admiral Kizaru was the only one who could not bring himself to do it. Everyone else made the difficult but correct choice. The choice to be a human above a slave, the choice to place personal bonds above blind obedience, and each one of these characters undoubtedly feels more fulfilled for it in the end. While, as the only one who failed in this test, Kizaru is the only one who is broken in the end. But here is the further genius of Oda's writing. Kizaru now exists as the most interesting man in One Piece, the man divided. And this is actually the second time Oda has written a character like this. We have actually already seen this exact same story of Kizaru's once before. The very exact same story, because there is another admiral that was a key player in this arc. An admiral that was written as a clear juxtaposition to Kizaru, and that character's name is Kuzan, the one who has already broken free. We all know that the Ohara incident has extremely deliberate, striking parallels to the Egghead arc. Both are centered around the world government aiming to silence scholars who were conducting dangerous research into the true history. Both times Buster Calls were called down upon the island. Egghead Island literally begins with a retelling of the story of Ohara. Vegapunk's story begins with picking up where Clover's story left off. Egghead Island and Enies Lobby are the only two arcs where the world government is the primary villain that the Straw Hats are fighting. Egghead is the continuation of Ohara in every sense, and both Ohara and Egghead featured a pivotal turning point for an admiral. A moment of great shame and moral collapse for them, as they find themselves placing their obedience above their humanity. In Egghead, Kizaru turned on his best friend for the world government, just as 22 years ago in Ohara, in the exact same position, with the exact same task, Aokiji turned on his best friend for the world government. The scenarios are identical, the characters repeating the exact same rhetoric. Kizaru calling himself a cog in the wheel, talking about how he simply cannot excuse reading the poneglyphs because the world government won't allow it. Just as Aokiji once told Saul that if something is for the greater good of the world, then he has no personal say in the matter. Both of these admirals' morals are questioned by their best friends, as both of these admirals seem to suppress their humanity to enact the world government's heartless justice. Now, Aokiji was lucky in a sense, because he saw the horrific genocide the world government carried out as it destroyed the civilian ship. This seemed to be a wake-up call that gave him just enough pause to spare his best friend in the end. But the entire experience still left Aokiji broken and questioning his own humanity and sense of justice. Kizaru unfortunately was not given a wake-up call, and he ended up carrying through with murdering his best friend. The experience seems to have left Kizaru broken much the same. Ultimately, both characters are left traumatized by the blood on their hands from obeying the world government. Aokiji traumatized by the blood on his hands of the innocent civilians of Ohara, Kizaru traumatized by the blood on his hands of his own best friend. And this is where the beauty of the potential of Kizaru lies. We know that this moment, this moral rock bottom that Aokiji found that he had hit, this was the trigger to a slow but steady climb back up, to reclaiming his sense of individuality. This was the beginning of Aokiji's arc of reflection, an arc where he finally began to think and question what he was doing, to question the world government, to ultimately leave the world government behind, and finally, today, to even rebel and fight against it. Oda has now written Kizaru to find himself in the very same place Aokiji once did, punished by the unbearable guilt of his actions. Now Kizaru has that same choice that Aokiji once did, to begin a new journey or to remain the same. This is the brilliance of the parallel between the two in this arc. We see in Kizaru the same obedient man that Aokiji once was, just as we see in Aokiji the free man that Kizaru could one day become. And the trigger to Aokiji's path to freedom, and the trigger to Kizaru's potential path to freedom, was yet again the power of personal bonds. And finally, in contrast to both of them, we have the third Admiral, the one for whom we don't even know if change is possible. Akainu has always been the most absolute of the Admirals, the one who always chooses to dogmatically follow the justice of the world government and then some, even taking additional steps such as bombing civilian ships or executing Marines who desert. And yet, is Akainu happy in this role of being the dog of the world government? All signs currently suggest no. Akainu was once a warrior on the front lines, but now he seems to be a neutered, chained pet throughout the post-time skip, his own desires and views constantly curbed by his masters. There is a particularly telling exchange he has with Kuma that could reveal a lot about Akainu's own internal struggle at the moment, though you can get my extended thoughts on that on my weekly podcast by supporting me on Patreon, link in the description below. That aside, we are reminded this arc that Akainu does have personal bonds. He once spared Aokiji despite them having a duel to the death, because Akainu could not bring himself to kill his former comrade. And in Egghead, Akainu is now shown to feel empathy for the pain of his brother-in-arms Kizaru. Akainu is essentially the picture of a man who most certainly is human deep down at his core. He has personal bonds and empathy just like anyone else. Yet he is so deeply devoted to serving the system above all else, that he has seemingly buried this humanity of his far too deep for it to ever be recovered. This is why in both Aokiji and Kizaru's pivotal character turning point moments, Akainu is used as the contrast. The destruction of the civilian ship in the name of the world government was coldly ordered by Akainu, even as it shakes Aokiji's entire faith in the system that he has blindly followed. Akainu heartlessly berates Kizaru for not being diligent enough in his duties, even as Kizaru tearfully grieves having to kill his best friend with his own hands. So far, this unshakable, inhumane obedience has been what Akainu represents. Whether Oda has some plans to somehow unearth even Akainu's humanity remains to be unseen, but at the moment, between Ohara and Egghead, Oda has painted a deliberate spectrum through the three Admirals: the free man, the divided man, and the chained man. And if Kizaru represents the tragedy of choosing obedience over one's personal bonds, on the opposite end we have Kuma, the single most powerful representation of what it means to place love above all else. Kuma is the encapsulation of Oda's message on the power of the human spirit, and what it can do in the name of love, of what it can achieve in the pursuit of dreams, of what it means to refuse to be controlled. Kuma lived his entire life a rebel, first breaking free of his own shackles as a slave, then working to free countless other slaves such as himself, then becoming a revolutionary to help people all across the world free themselves from the world government. Kuma was purity and kindness personified, always sacrificing his own well-being to literally take on the pain of others, a true living saint. With all the heavy religious symbolism and the extreme emphasis on self-sacrifice for the sake of others, one could even say that Kuma was meant to be viewed as Christ-like in a sense. And so, the story of Kuma is almost a parable, as one day the devil decided to put this Christ-like saint to the test. From the very beginning, this saint had represented everything the devil hated in the human spirit, as Kuma refused to be controlled. And so the devil would take this shining symbol of the human spirit and strip him of everything: his family, his status, his freedom, even his mind. He would become a slave, an empty shell. In doing so, the devil thought he would prove himself triumphant over the human spirit. And it seemed like the devil had succeeded. Kuma was truly reduced to a mindless slave, with no consciousness, no autonomy, brought to the lowest point a human could possibly be dragged to. And yet, through it all, Kuma still somehow retained his human spirit. Somehow that was the one thing the devil could not take away from him. And the reason why that is because what sustained and drove this man's spirit all throughout is the one thing the devil could never understand: love. And so, in maybe the single most powerful act ever seen in One Piece, we see this enslaved man who has been robbed of his mind, robbed of all conscious thought, whose body is nothing more than an empty, decaying shell. This seemingly completely and utterly broken slave, we see him somehow begin to scale the heavens without anything else, fueled by the only thing that they could not take away from him: his unbroken spirit that drives him to save his daughter. He fights through the land of the gods, flies across the ocean, and rescues her from the devil. This moment represents the ultimate triumph of the human spirit over authoritarian control. This moment proves that no matter what they do, stripping away a man of his titles, his dignity, his very consciousness, ultimately they cannot take away his free will. And this moment proves that Emu and the Gorosei's ultimate undoing will be the very thing that they cannot understand about human nature: love. That is the power of the parable of Kuma. To date, arguably the most powerful character storyline in all of One Piece, because it is the single most powerful representation of all the most important ideas of One Piece. So far, the ideas that have been established are that free will can never be eliminated, and therefore it is impossible to control living beings, and that the greatest drivers to rebel and choose free will over obedience is personal bonds. But where the Egghead arc goes one step further is in how this idea ties into dreams, and what actually gives dreams value. To begin with, much as Egghead calls back to Ohara in many ways with regards to the themes of free will and disobedience, Egghead also calls back to Skypiea, the first major arc about dreams, by setting the story on another sky island. This one even more fantastical than the last, as Egghead is a futuristic wonderland that seems to defy even the logic of reality in many ways. This is a very deliberately crafted setting to explore the idea of dreams yet again, but now with a deeper approach than Skypiea. To begin with, Oda begins to expand philosophically on the power of dreams in new ways. The origin of devil fruits are revealed to be through the dreams of people. People believe in a certain future so much that they are actually able to manifest it. While this is obviously a fantasy magic phenomenon in the fictional context of One Piece, the real-world concept that is being paralleled here is the messaging that all great things that mankind creates in this world are brought forth through the power of dreams. This fantastical island of wondrous inventions and advancements that Vegapunk has created, it's a product of his dreams. He brought it to life through technology, not magic. But the idea is one and the same. All our progress in our own world, the real world, everything that we see around us, all the fantastical achievements and wonders that we can observe, many things that even Vegapunk has yet to create, in fact, these are all symbolic of mankind's dreams. Everything wondrous that we enjoy in the world today was born of the dreams of mankind in the past, and the future that we will create is the product of mankind's dreams today. And the ideal world that Vegapunk one day wants to build? A true utopia, while that was not possible for him in his lifetime, that dream can be passed on, his progress built upon, to one day achieve it. I think drawing this connection of the idea of technology and mankind's wondrous advancements to dreams is a philosophically poignant writing choice by Oda. It's something that's true, but that we may not necessarily recognize when we think about the concept of dreams. We already live in a world of dreams. The amazing works and creations that we see around us, this impossibly advanced world that we live in that we so often take for granted, all of it was brought into being through the dreams of those in the past. And here Oda uses Vegapunk to make another interesting point about dreams, the concept of admirable, beautiful dreams and selfish ones. The difference is simple: greed. Everything that the Stella Vegapunk and all of his other satellites work to create is for the sake of the future of mankind, all except for York. York's dream, her desire, represents selfishness, the desire to leverage her creations for personal gain. While Vegapunk hopes that the Mother Flame will create a utopia for mankind, York sees the Mother Flame as simply an avenue to gaining more wealth and status for herself. Once again, this goes back to the idea of the true power of the human spirit, doing things for the sake of others, not for oneself. Love is what matters, and as all of Vegapunk's work is for the sake of all of mankind, that is the type of dream that has merit, whereas York's selfish dream is obviously evil. And so, in a sort of karmic justice, everything that can go wrong for York this arc does go wrong. What should have been a simple plan for her keeps spiraling out of control, whereas Vegapunk actually pulls off his daring plan perfectly from the start. And interestingly, every lucky break that fate could possibly grant Vegapunk comes to him this arc. The friendly Yonko crew, the Straw Hats arriving just in time to aid him, the Giants of Elbaf coming to aid them, and most curiously, the ancient robot itself awakening as though through sheer magic to make sure that Vegapunk's noble will was seen through till the end. There's a great little bit of symbolism here that can be easily missed, wherein Vegapunk's own signature robot, the Vega Force, that he believed represented the dreams of mankind, was callously destroyed by Kizaru, the puppet of the world government. And yet, as though Vegapunk is being rewarded for his tireless pursuit in aiding mankind, a new giant robot rises up in its place. The true robot of Vegapunk's dreams that he always said represented a future for mankind beyond what even Vegapunk himself could create. And this miraculous robot single-handedly defeats the entire world government forces in one fell swoop, making sure that Vegapunk's legacy and hopes for mankind would be passed on to the rest of the world. Interestingly, this victory is achieved through Haki, another representation of how all the armies and soldiers of oppression are no match for the human spirit. So through Vegapunk, literally both sides of Vegapunk, we are given a new message regarding dreams. Not just that dreams have great power, but that the most powerful dreams are those that are selfless in some way. The more selfish a dream, the less meaningful it is. The more selfless a dream, the greater weight it carries. This is reflected even more strongly in Kuma's story. Yet again, Kuma represents a sort of transcendent form of good, in that his pursuit of the dream of Nika was completely self-sacrificial. All his life, Kuma clung to this dream of Nika, a warrior of liberation, and even though Kuma could not find Nika anywhere in the world, Kuma chose to embody that dream through his own actions, living specifically with the dream to free as many people as he possibly could, in the hopes of being Nika for others. That was Kuma's dream, the most selfless dream possible. And because Kuma lived in such a self-sacrificial manner, all the while clinging to his fate in the path that he was walking, his beliefs were ultimately rewarded. As the final buccaneer of an ancient line of buccaneers, all killed off one by one over the ages, all of them tragically dying believing in this hero Nika who would never come, Kuma was the last one. The last dreamer, who, in spite of every injustice and misfortune that befell him, his family, and his people, still believed and stayed true through it all, tirelessly living his life, selflessly helping people in the name of that dream of Nika. Literally all the way up to his final moments of consciousness, where finally, after a lifetime of pain and suffering and blind belief in walking the right path, in these final moments, Kuma made his dream a reality. Kuma dreamed of Nika for the sake of others, took on the role of Nika for the sake of others, and was finally rewarded with birthing the true Nika. By saving Luffy with his final act, Kuma allowed Nika to come into being. And in fitting poetic justice, that very same Nika saved Kuma's daughter, thereby ending the cycle of slavery that Kuma's entire family line had suffered for centuries. Everything Kuma believed in, the mythical warrior of liberation that would one day come and bring salvation to his loved ones and all the oppressed people of the world, this belief that he held to despite all the suffering and hopelessness that he endured, it came true. And it came true precisely because Kuma's dream was such a pure and selfless one. Kuma even got to witness his own daughter become Nika herself, and Bonnie's fruit in fact perfectly encapsulates the themes of the arc as well. As Vegapunk said, dreams represent all the branching possible futures of humanity, all the hopes that we have for the future. Bonnie's fruit, to become any type of future that she imagines, is quite literally the fruit of dreams, the perfectly symbolically fitting fruit to conclude the arc of dreams. And finally, that brings us full circle to the first chapter of the arc, Luffy's own dream. We've always thought that Luffy's dream was simply to become the king of the pirates, something that he wanted for himself, because he wanted to be free. However, the Egghead arc opens with Luffy revealing another, hidden side to his dream, one that we don't yet get to see. While we are left wondering what this greater dream could be, the Egghead arc then goes on to establish the thematic message that the most powerful dreams are those that are motivated by others in some way, whether it be Vegapunk for the betterment of mankind, or Kuma to see as many people freed as possible. Reflecting on this concept, many of the Straw Hats' dreams are actually already like this. Chopper wants to cure all diseases, Brook wants to fulfill his promise to Laboon, and in fact, even the Straw Hats whose dreams seem self-centered on the surface are also motivated by others. We are repeatedly reminded that Zoro isn't becoming the strongest swordsman just for himself, but for the sake of his captain and his childhood best friend. Sanji wants to find the All Blue, but we know that it's to cook the best meals for all those who are hungry. Frankie wants his ship to sail to the end of the ocean to fulfill someone else's dream, so on and so forth. So if that's the case for all the Straw Hats, just as it is for all the most meaningful dreams in the story, and we now know that Luffy's own dream is more than just becoming Pirate King, then could his true hidden dream be related to something that actually has an impact on others beyond just himself? After all, we just learned that, much like Vegapunk, there is in fact an ideal world that Luffy does want to create. There is an ideal world that Luffy dreams of. Luffy wants to create a world where everyone has as much to eat as they need, where none of his friends ever have to go hungry again. And that is as selfless a drive as one can possibly imagine. So with this additional motivation in mind, what exactly is it at the end of Luffy's dream? What is the full picture that Oda is hiding from us? Because ultimately, as Vegapunk says, it is those who refuse to be oppressed who will shape the world of tomorrow. Meaning the world of tomorrow will be Luffy's to create. What this arc, Egghead Island, the beginning of the final saga, established is precisely why it's time for the world government to fear the rebellion of tomorrow. Because it seems that try as they might, they simply cannot suppress the free will of man. No matter what, it is in man's nature to rebel. No matter what, it is in man's nature to fight for others. No matter what, it is in man's nature to dream. And so, the arc that marks the beginning of the end masterfully constructs one of the most profound and coherently structured pieces of thematic messaging in all of One Piece. As though now is the time for this grand epic to finally begin tying all of its ideas together into a final, deeply layered concluding statement for the entire story. So let me know what you loved most about the arc in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video then definitely like, comment, and subscribe. And if you enjoyed this video and you want to support the channel, you can support me on Patreon, where you can also get my extended thoughts on Akainu and the Admirals' further symbolic parallels and contrasts on my weekly podcast. Link in the description below.